Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine. I'm sitting here in the beautiful vineyards of Crocker Starr with owner and winemaker Pam Starr. And welcome, Pam, and tell us a little bit about Crocker Starr.
Allison, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. It's always great to share this really beautiful little space where we can watch the vines and taste a little wine. And maybe next time when you're here, it won't be so hot. We can walk out there and touch them as well. So welcome to Crocker and Starr Winery. This is a project that I started with my partner, Charlie Crocker, in 1997. And the partnership means the two most important elements of making wine, and that's grapes and talent. It's a kind of a cute story. You know, I met Charlie, actually started in 1996 when I met him. He thought I wanted to buy some grapes from his vineyard here, this 1870s winery estate that he bought in 1971. And I met in 1996, and he called me up one time and said, I understand you want to buy some grapes. And I said, no. But I understand you might want to start a winery. And he said, no. But why don't you come and see me in my office in San Francisco? So I went down to the big city, and I went up to the 25th floor of 1 Post Street in San Francisco. And I walked out of the elevator in my winemaking outfit, which is standard jeans, vest, and a button-down shirt, and thought, well, this is going to be about a 3-second conversation. And 3 hours later, we emerged. We had just shaken hands, and Crocker and Starr was born. So we set out, and it was 97 was our first vintage. We did some grooming of the vineyard. I converted this vineyard from conventional farming to organic farming, and that process takes several years. And Charlie's commitment to the organic process was fierce, and so we were able to resurrect some old vines on the property in about 4 years.
So how many acres of land do you have here, and what are the various grapes that are planted here?
So the Crocker Estate, which was the Dowdell and Sons family winery back in 1870s pre-Prohibition, is the original parcel that Charlie bought is about 60 acres in total. And that included the beautiful Cab Franc vines that I launched the winery with, some old vine Cabernet Sauvignon. There was Merlot here and a little Petit Verdot and some Chardonnay. And then about 5-6 years into our partnership, Charlie's got a call from his neighbor. They were selling the sort of southeastern section of their place, and Charlie bought their land, and now the whole property includes about 100 acres. Of that, probably 10 is the old walnut orchard, and the family winery, which was an old stone winery building, changed into a home when Charlie bought it. And then the original 1870s Victorian home, which actually, interesting enough, is one of the first Sears and Roebuck kit homes. So the varieties that are here are classically the Bordeaux planted varieties. I mean, that's very traditional in Napa and Sonoma to have Cabernet, Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot. We were templating. I started making wine in 1984, and the biggest templates we had were the old world. So every time we wanted to create something, I said we always ran back to the mothership to learn.
So what is your very first memory relevant to wine?
My first memory relevant to wine. I was a starving student at UC Davis. My parents were embroiled in an awful divorce, and so getting a nickel was tough. So I took a job. I went to UC Davis, and I took a job at a wine shop, which I knew nothing about wine. I mean, I was studying science and math, and I had taken some viticulture and enology, so I knew enough to sort of fake my way to get the job to do this barista wine person job. And I learned about the Rieslings of Germany. That was my first real sort of educational bout with the diversity of one grape variety in one region.
And do you recall the first, or it could be, doesn't have to be the first, the most memorable wine you've ever drunk?
So not fair. I'm just coming back from an auction where people were popping bottles of wine from 1943 and 1945, 1957, 1961. It's a really unfair question. I have because my journey has been a journey of people who love wine. Every place I've been, people have been so generous and popping corks for this winemaker who they assumed knew, the differentials of, all the grape varieties and the houses of Old World. And so I have to say that probably my most memorable wine event came with my education and my knowledge and post my purchasing of wines for my own collection. And that was years ago, was my 50th birthday. I went to the very famous Burns Steakhouse in Tampa, Florida. And I was very fortunate. I knew the somm there. And I was connected to the somm there through a big wine collector. And I said, I want to have 16 guests at a dinner, and we're going to do a Burgundy night and a Bordeaux night. Can you help me? And the guy said, yeah. So the most memorable night, though, was Bordeaux night, because that's really my love. And we started the evening with a Magnum of 1918 Gerard LaRose. And it was unbelievable. We had 15 wines that night. None of them were corked, and none of them were over the hill. So that was very memorable.
So speaking of old wines, you mentioned that you have a cellar. What is the most expensive wine you have in your own cellar?
Probably the domestics that I collected. I have some of the domestic Cabernets that are traded high in auction. So I have a couple magnums of Screaming Eagle. I don't drink them. I let other people open the corks on those. They're delicious wines. I've been very fortunate that friends of mine were very good friends of Jeannie Phillips, who started Screaming Eagle. So I'm very familiar with the wine. I'm very fortunate that I can say that. And then I think my next expensive wines are some of the Harlans I have. But I have to say that my most prized wines in my cellar are the wines that I like to pop corks on and drink. My old alma mater, I used to make wines for Mary Novak, God rest her soul, and her family at Spotswood. And I have every year of that wine. And I'm drinking currently some of the wines that I made in 1992 and 1993. I have some of the historic Chateau Montelenas. I was just recently very privileged to open up the 1973 Stag's Leap Paris tasting winner Cabernet. So these are wines of my fascination. I think we always look to the old world because that's my training, and that is the collectors. Those are the collectors that I'm involved with. However, I have a collection of Cali Cabs that, I'm drinking 1966 Louis Martini Mountain Red Cabernet and 1967, and I feel like there are so many stories in there. I've been making wines for a while, and I'm still learning, and every bottle speaks volumes, specifically 750 mils volume, but that's a wine joke. They speak volumes about where they came from, the time period that they were made in, and who was at the helm.
So, do you think that there is a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, but I think that there is such thing as perfect growing conditions.
She says with a nice grin on her face. And what is your opinion of wine critics and scores?
Ooh, tough one. That's a double-edged sword. Wine critics are, when I started in this business in the early 80s, thank God for wine critics. I mean, we needed somebody to bring a voice to the United States of America, the highballers of the Midwest, the cocktail doers. We were still living in the 1960s and 70s. We were not drinking wine. It was, Almaden and the crazy, big producer bottles that were in my mother's refrigerator. It's not like I grew up around a really great wine. It was like everything had an ice cube in it. Yeah, exactly. Or any sort of spritzer you wanted to put with it. So we needed the critics to kind of evolve ourselves out of a cocktail sort of driven mentality to the fact that wine is food. Wine belongs at every table. It is not for the pretentious. Now, that wasn't true of the critics in the 70s and 80s. It really took us until the 90s when young buyers started, with the explosion of the tech world and the money that came into the youth's hands. It's like, well, what do I buy? Mm-hmm. Well, this is what you buy and this is what you drink. So I truly believe that, wine critics, if they can write about the place and convey the story of the wine, I think that is critical mass to the consumer. What's tough is we call this a 100-point score, but there's only 15 points ever used. So I don't know that the scoring is valid, but I don't have an idea how to change it. Scoring, I think it's really important to get to know your critic. So how does your critic talk about wine? How do they score the wine? What bandwidth do they use? And do they only write about positive experiences? I think it's really important to get to know your writer. As a reader, you need to know that writer. And that's as important as getting to know your winery.
Absolutely. So for you as a consumer, some quick questions. What's your preference, red, white, or rosé?
I'm a red girl all the way. You hold a gun to my head, I'm like, oh, that bottle of Cabernet over there would be great. We had this conversation recently with a group of wine collectors, and as some of them have gotten older and some of them are drinking in the 80s, and they're in their 70s, they're turning to Pinot Noirs, but they're turning to Burgundies. So that's kind of an unfair, Pinot Noir thing, but I think Pinot Noir is a great grape variety to satisfy the need to have sort of a artistic grape juice translation, meaning that it's not just strawberries, it's not just Coca-Cola, it's not just sandalwood, it's all of those together. But I feel like the soul is satisfied when you have a Cabernet-based wine, because the volume of the texture and the flavor and the depth and the length in which the wine fills your mouth and fills your mind and fills your soul is completely satisfying.
So I know this might be a tough question for you, since the first time we ever met, we started with a champagne, but still or sparkling wine?
Ooh, sparkling wine. If I have to, I got to start somewhere. Because sparkling wine, you shake the bubbles out, it becomes a still wine, right? Then do I have to change my answer to white wine? I don't want to.
And for sparkling wine, do you have a preference for champagne or another region?
I'm definitely champagne focused, though I am an explorer. I like to pop bubbles on our local champagne here, sparkling wine. Don't do that. Schramsberg does a fantastic job on several levels. I think we have other people that are rising up to the level that Schramsberg has, and they have their own distinctive style, too. There's the Tattinger house down in South Napa in Carneros called Domaine Carneros, and they make a very high-end champagne. Excuse me, boy, I've just got champagne on my mind, sparkling wine. But as far as champagne goes, I'm a real fan of some of the basics. I think Pierre Peters is a super basic one, Villamar. And then, of course, again, I was just with a bunch of wine collectors, and we were drinking 1970 Comte de Champagne, so it's like, that didn't suck.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a tough life. How do you feel about the rules of wine and food pairing? Do you break them and do red wine with white meat, or white wine with red meat, or do you try to follow a linear line there?
The rules of wine and food pairing kind of go along with the first set of critics that were caught in the 60s and 70s. If you're going to have a cocktail when you start, you're probably a traditionalist. You need to let that go. Just let it go. You need to break every single rule because, quite frankly, eggs and bacon go with Cabernet.
Okay, we're going to break the rules. And when we break the rules and we drink a little too much, those hangovers come. Do you have any special remedies or cures for hangovers?
Well, my husband will tell you that I'm one of those very fortunate people in the universe that must have a very high alcohol dehydrogenase in my blood system, because it's very rare for me to wake up with a hangover. Yeah. And so on the days that I have woken up with a hangover, it's usually not because of wine. It's probably some tequila thing that happened. And the biggest remedy that I have is that you must drink drink excessive amounts of water. Even though you don't feel like drinking water, you must drink excessive amounts of water. You should probably have sparkling water. Definitely take some Advil. And the smart thing to do once you feel like you're starting to recover and your internal organs are starting to work again, then you need to work out, sweat it out, and then start the whole water process again.
That sounds like good advice. What do you think a non-drinker loses out by not drinking your wine?
Ooh, God, they're missing out on so much. A non-wine drinker misses out on what I would say is the oldest tradition and form of preserving fresh fruit. And so, for instance, if you take a non-wine drinker and they say they drink beer, you're not going to send them right to some of the wines that I just mentioned. You're going to take them in slowly. And I think the non-wine drinker misses out on the plethora and the variety, the cornucopia of flavors that they could actually put into their life and into their meals.
And if space aliens were to land on your vineyard right now, what wine would you want to give them from your cellar to taste?
Ooh, I'd give them the Cabernet Franc.
That's a really simple answer because it's a wonderful wine. So each vintage tells a different story, which I think you would agree with. I know you're very terroir driven. In other words, do you think there are things that repeat themselves more often or not each year?
So if we look at a decade of growing seasons, say, and we're here in the fancy, very fortunate land of Napa, where very few vintages go awry. We have luxury growing here. Let's just speak that way, because other countries are not so fortunate, and so the reviewers got into talking a lot about vintages. But when talking about California wines, Napa specifically, we have very few vintages that we struggle with to make great wines out of. And so within a decade, there might be one that we struggle with. And I think the reviewers are looking for a story at that vintage, but what turns out happening is a vintage that winemakers struggle with. Typically, we're not going to put anything in the bottle that we don't love at the end of the day. And I'd say that my most recent example would be go back to 1989, and it rained a lot at harvest, which everybody's ready to pick grapes. And it rained a lot. And so rain is not good because it potentially dilutes the grape. And if the temperature's wrong, there are other assorted things that can grow that are not supposed to be on the grapes. But doing a retrospective tasting of some of the classic California Cabernets that came out of 1989, there are some beautiful wines. And I'm talking, what of those wines are 20 years old? So, and they're still beautiful.
So do you have any good luck rituals for when harvest is about to start?
I don't know if they're rituals, but I look for signs. And so we have flowers in the valley, and they're beautiful and pink, and they have a single stalk, and they have no leaves. So the common name is called the naked lady, and they're very aromatic, and they start popping up everywhere. And I feel like that's a sign that maybe we're about 2 to 3 weeks away, maybe just 2 weeks away from harvesting our first reds. And then as far as superstitious, I don't walk under ladders during harvest. It's true, I don't. I have to say that I start every morning by doing what I would call the rounds. So I have a cup of coffee in my hand, and I just want to go in there, and I want anything that's got an odd smell that can make it past my coffee cup. So I use my coffee as sort of a barrier to regular smells of fermentation, and I'll let the non-regular smells of fermentation sort of pierce. Other than that, I wear my yellow vest when I harvest Sauvignon Blanc. I wear my purple vest when I harvest Cabernet Franc, and I wear my blue vest when I harvest Cabernet Sauvignon.
And then many producers walk in their cellars and talk to the wine in the barrels, or some have been known to do this. Do you ever walk into your cellar, talk to your barrels, and what do you say to your wine?
I never talk to them. I feel like, it's a mind meld. So I will go to the barrel and put my hand on it and just sort of rub my hand over the top. Part of that is to sort of assess whether the wood is getting enough moisture, what's the humidity in the room, and you can tell that by the shape of the barrel. So rubbing my hand over the belly of the barrel allows me to know whether the staves are moist enough. On the lots that I really, really love, I go and I rub the head of the barrel, and the barrel head is typically etched with our winery, Crocker and Starr Winery name on there. So sometimes I run my fingers over that, like, okay, don't forget who you are. And then typically I like to go in by myself. I leave the lights off. It's dark and it's quiet. And I just do that by myself.
So some people read tea leaves in the bottom of the cup to be able to tell the future. If you could read the bottom of a red wine glass, what would you want it to reveal?
If I could read the bottom of a red wine glass, I would want it to reveal the density of the color. The crystals left behind would be the character of the acid, so maybe the brightness and the structure and the balance. And
when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I wanted to be an ice skater. Peggy Fleming was my hero. I'm not kidding. I wanted to fly through the air just like Peggy. I would watch her spin on the ice, and she had the beautiful skirt, and she was so pretty, and she would just fly so gracefully. And I thought, oh, maybe I could do that.
That's a good thing you became a winemaker.
It's really true.
And when you're not working, how do you spend your free time today?
Well, today is all about projects with my husband. We are in the process of trying to build a house. We just resurrected a swimming pool on this property that we bought that was completely destroyed in the earthquake. And you can always find my dog and myself and my husband sort of walking about town. And because I've been on the road so much this year, it's me and my Peloton.
So do you do any sports in particular, or is Peloton sort of your main sport?
I like riding my bike. I used to mountain bike a lot. The running of the company and my travel schedule sort of prohibited me from keeping up with the schedule. I loved riding early morning single track at Skyline Park, which is one of my joys. All the birds were out and the deer, and every once in a while maybe something that was maybe a little bit more scary than that. But the wild turkeys were always fantastic. And because of the project of building the winery and building our house, I take great joy in walking around our property. We have eagles or egrets and herons. Hoot owls, the little cute hoot owls, the wind lifts up so high that the hawks and the turkey vultures just fly right in front. So I just really feel grateful to be able to be in the health that I'm in and kind of taking every day at this point.
Are you a supporter of any sports team?
Ooh, supporter of sports team. I like sports. It's really funny, we were talking earlier about sports, and my first love was hockey. I lived in the Midwest for a short period of time when my father was getting his orthopedic surgeon license, and the very first hockey game I went to was the St. Louis Blues. So I've always followed a little bit of hockey. I was very fortunate to have the entire Hurricanes hockey coaching staff here. I made them sign the head of a barrel, which was really great. So I like to follow hockey. It's fun.
And if your team, whether it was the Blue Jays or the Hurricanes, were to win, what bottle of wine would you give them?
They'd get Cabernet Franc.
So who's your favorite singer or group?
Ooh, so not fair, because if my sister was here, she's a doctor, and Kirsten, she knows the name of every drummer, every guitar player, the band, the name. I'm like, ooh, I can dance to this. This is great. But I think I've really gotten into country music since I married my husband. I really like some of the artists there. If I could have Big and Rich show up to the winery and play a couple tunes. My latest fascination is Kelsey Ballerini with her song I Hate Love Songs, because I just think it's so poetic, and it kind of reminds me of The Sound of Music. And and I was just very fortunate to marry a guy who is teaching me a lot about some of the country artists. So I just sat next to Kix Brooks of Brooks and Dunn at an auction, and I would have them come and play too. So I think that's my latest fascination, but I'm a huge fan of the Blues Travelers, Counting Crows. I like Queen. nothing better than like bringing Queen in. So if you morning's over, time to like Kickstarter stuff, I'm going to play Fat Bottom Girls. I am. They make the rock and world go round. Period.
Do you have a favorite film dedicated to wine?
I don't. I do not have a favorite film dedicated to wine. There are several out there, but I have found that as a winemaker and an artist, it's been very difficult for me to watch them. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I have to close my ears because I'm like, I can't hear what they're saying. That's just not okay. But I think one of my favorite film wine moments is with Meg Ryan and Kevin Kline in French Kiss, where they've made it to the south of France or to his family's area, and he's showing her Kevin Kline's showing her the sensory box that he made as a young man, and just the dialogue back and forth, and it's like, okay, smell this one. Oh, it smells like cinnamon. It smells like mushroom. Okay, well, close your eyes and taste the wine again. Ooh, this wine smells a little bit like cinnamon and maybe a little bit of the mushroom and rosemary. And then she opens her eyes and says, a little, what did she say? It's a little bold, maybe like me. And Kevin Kline looks at her and goes, you are not wrong. The wine is very much like people.
I like your imitation. Good accent. For a really romantic evening, what is the wine you would order for you and your husband?
Well, it would be an older wine. And my husband came with his own dowry. He had his own collection. Luckily, he had some Crocker and Starr in the cellar, so he passed muster. This is 11 years ago now. I'd say that one of the first wines that we drank together, I had brought an old Figeac from the right bank of France. And I might pull something right banky out that we would actually start with. It would probably be with about 25, 30 years of age. And we would move from there to a Cabernet Sauvignon, old Cali Cab, because Norm has some of those in his cellars. Probably open up an old Spotswood, my alma mater. There you go.
So what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice is don't take it personally.
Anything else you would advise us today if you were to offer advice to the audience?
Well, I think if you want to become a winemaker, you got to be able to just let all the stops move to the side. So I would say that anything is possible. If you believe anything is possible, then really anything is possible. And let your passion and your personal power shine through with the belief. And say your belief turns out to be not correct. It's probably just not correct for that one item. So the power of belief is a really strong charge to make it through all the levels and steps you got to make it through to make yourself a substantial winemaker in this business.
So to date, what would you say is your proudest achievement in your work?
I would say that my proudest achievement is I always hoped that I would build my own winery facility. And it took 19 years as Crocker and Starr as a business to actually break ground. And we built our own winery, and the winery design is all that I dreamed of. I dreamt it while I was making wines at other facilities, and then we built it. So it's been a pretty fast, fantastic 24 months in our own place.
So a VIP is photographed sitting in a restaurant by the paparazzi, and there's a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Who would you want that VIP person to be?
Dang, who would I want that to be? This is a tough one because there's so many out there. A lot of people would say Oprah because she's got so many products out there. But there's so many strong women out there that maybe the public wouldn't know. I would love it for it to be a Forbes CEO of one of the Fortune 500 companies.
And complete this sentence. A table without wine is like?
A table without people.
Very simple. Very simple. So do you think that we will be drinking wine in the year 2300 or beyond? And if so, what type of wines do you think we'll be drinking in another 200 years or beyond?
I won't be here, but I believe that all the wines that I've been fortunate to consume won't be around either because we'll have consumed them all. But I think in the year 2300, people will be drinking wine, and they will be drinking wine that is maybe 50, 60, 80, 100 years old, and they'll be drinking brand new wines as well. The varieties and where they're grown, life is changing. Global warming is real, but we don't know how that's going to reverse itself. And when we're talking 200 years from now, 300 years from now, and I think, the universe has yet to shown us everything that this world is made of. I mean, we have volcanoes erupting. We have hurricanes surrounding us. We have earthquakes in areas that never would have been an earthquake. Mm-hmm. So I think the shift in land and weather is going to determine where the grapes are grown. But I don't think we're going to let go of the classics, because the classics are proven delicious. They have hedonism all over them. When, Cabernets are young and Cab Francs are young, and when they're older, and Pinot Noirs and Sauvignon Blancs, and we're still going to be making them, because there's nothing better than having a fresh tomato salad and some Sauvignon Blanc, or a hamburger and Cabernet Franc. We're definitely going to be eating those.
So, if I was to send you off to a deserted island, what are 3 wines you would take with you?
Just as a general category?
Sure.
Okay, well, it's definitely going to be champagne. It's going to be one of them. It's, I'm sorry. And hopefully there's going to be an ice box on this island, because it's got to be the right temperature. I'm definitely taking my Cabernet Franc with me, because Cabernet Franc, meaning on this island, of course, I'm going to assume it's surrounded by water, so Cabernet Franc is a surf and turf wine. It is a segue wine between fish and meat, and I think, the third one's a tough one. Cabernet Sauvignon lasts long. It tastes great when it's older. I think if you're on a deserted island, though, I think I'm going to want a little bit of Pinot Noir, because it's going to be hot outside, and so not to leave my Cabernet brethren home. But if I'm going to be stuck there, I'm going to have those 3.
And what is one winemaking area in the world that you would still like to explore?
I have not been to South Africa. I would really like to go there. There's a community of people and a society there that I would really like to meet, and I would like to know how their struggles have led them to a community where they take their excess income and buy wine with it.
So we're almost finished, and I thank you for your time today, but now is the most challenging part, it seems, which is, it should be the most fun part, but this tends to be the most challenging, is I'm going to name a couple of grapes, and I want you to tell me either the song or type of music that kind of is conjured up in your mind, what you'd be listening to, whatever comes to mind. So since your baby is your Cab Franc, let's start with that.
Cab Franc is, because it's so versatile, it tends to be a little bit more versatile. So there's a Pandora station called the Hipster Barbecue. This is so sad, right? So and some of the musicians I don't know that are on there, but my young team has brought the Hipster Barbecue music to me. So I think that, and I think the Counting Crows are great with Cab Franc.
Okay, what about a Right Bank Bordeaux?
So a blend. I think with a blend, I'm going to pull out a little bit more like Billy Idol and some of his original classics.
And Sauvignon Blanc? Domestic
Sauvignon Blanc. I had to make the girls turn on music that was a little bit more fun and lively, not party music, and not coffee shop music. Absolutely not coffee shop music. I think that, I mentioned Kelsey Ballerini. I think that actually there's a genre of singers, women singers, that around that would be great. I mean, Kelly Clark's going to be fantastic to listen to with Sauvignon Blanc.
And last, champagne.
I don't anybody shoot me out there for saying this, but as a little girl, I played the violin. And I love classical music, huge fan of it. And I would definitely play Mozart, and the most lively pieces of Mozart with champagne, because it can be super happy. It would never play Beethoven and some of the dark, not the Requiem, no way. It has to be the light, party Mozart that goes with the bubbles.
Well, fantastic. Pam, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go, if you could just remind people where they can find your wines and how they can visit you.
So you can find Crocker and Starr Winery in St. Helena. We're mostly direct-to-consumer. We're about 95%. We have a little bit of distribution out in Texas and a couple other states for our Appalachian blends that some people might know as the Bridesmaid. And you can come and see us. We're by appointment only, and you will be the only guest here, so it's a one-on-one experiential. You can go to our website at crockerstarr.com, and Starr has 2 R's in it. Or you can give us a call at the farmhouse at 707-967-9111. And come and see us. We have a really special sort of touch the vines, taste the wines experiential.
Fantastic. Thank you again for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Allison. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.